I don't know how long I'm going to go, and I probably won't have time to mention all of that at the end. So, Psalm 127, let's begin. I'm going to read the text as I did last night. We'll jump in with a lot of thoughts and ideas, but I do want to read the text for us. 2 chapters, so fasten in. 2 chapters I'm going to read tonight. It says this, in Psalm 127 and verse 1, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchmen stay awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. For so he gives his beloved sheep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. Happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with their enemies in the gate. That's 127. 128, let's read that as well. Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. When you eat the labor of your hands, you shall be happy, and it shall be well with you. Your wife shall be like, I like this and we'll talk about it, like a fruitful vine in the very heart of your house. Your children like olive plants all around your table. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. The Lord bless you out of Zion, and may you see the good of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Yes, may you see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. That's what we'll talk about tonight as far as looking at Scripture. There were several yesterday that said, please don't change your subject tomorrow, meaning tonight. I said I won't do that. This is one that I've looked forward to preaching. Family means a lot to me. Most of you probably don't know my background. I say this just to assure you how much family means to me. I was 11 years old. I was put in foster care. I was in 24 different homes in a year. I was bounced around a lot in several group of homes. My brother and I, my full brother, we were separated when we were put in foster care, and I didn't see him for probably 10 years. So the family that I knew, it was pulled apart at a young age. And so I'm here as well. The day we got married, none of my family came to my wedding. So when I speak about family, I'm speaking about something that's very near and dear to me. And when I join myself to a local congregation, they are my family, and we will work out our problems and our differences. But I want to tell you that I'm speaking from a place in my heart that's very deep. So when I speak of the family, I'm speaking of something that's really important to me. And that doesn't carry a whole lot of weight. Family is important to our God. And that's what makes this subject matter so very, very important tonight. I've seen a lot of statistics in preparation for this lesson on the divorce rate and single-parent living and kids who have been born to unwed parents. Listen, we can throw out all those statistics and you can just open your eyes and look around. We know these numbers are through the roof. But we know it. We see it day by day. Had a parent-teacher meeting. It wasn't really with the teachers. I'll let your imagination run wild with that. But we had to meet with the parent and the principal and vice principal and talk with them about our youngest daughter, Mara. And in that conversation, the vice principal said to us, Mara, you don't know how lucky you are. Because 90% of the kids in this school don't have two parents at home. 90%. You heard that right. 90% of the kids in that school don't have two parents at home. I don't want to get personal with you, but I've thought in congregations sometimes asking the questions, how many of you come from a broken home? My hand would be raised first and foremost. How many of you have been raised by your grandparents? I'm sure there's hands that would be raised. We took in foster kids for a while. We heard a lot of stories, but also seen things with our eyes. We know that this world is fractured and broken. And we know this because many of us can just look into our own home life. We've got a brother or sister that's gone through a divorce, abusive relationship. Maybe we've got a brother or sister that's raising kids out of wedlock. It's in our face every day. We don't have to go to the school systems, is what I'm trying to say, because many of us know that it's crept inside local congregations. And I'm happy for that in some senses. That we are giving people the opportunity to hear the gospel no matter what their situation is. And as these people come in humble obedience to the Lord and join themselves in local congregations, they bring some baggage with them. But it's not baggage that we in the church, local congregations, should point at and treat people differently because of the situations they come out of. I've seen it happen, and it's sad that we do that. We've got our families together, and they don't. We got one of the men at Greenwood who I became very dear with. He's been single for a lot of years, and he would always say he doesn't get invited out because he's a single guy. You know, he's an individual that would often complain about a lot of things, and I didn't pay much attention to it. But then I started realizing most of our gatherings are centered upon people with a structured family. And those people that are on the fringes of that often get left out. And so I want to start this lesson by just helping you appreciate the heart side of this lesson. That there are people that are struggling. And before we turn our nose up at each other and begin to squabble and fight when somebody has a bad day, I hope that we'll give them the benefit of that it's just a bad day, and that we'll get to know each other as we ought to. Because the greater message in this lesson is not so much about our physical families as much as it is our spiritual families. Listen, many of us don't have the family life that we should have when it comes to the physical side of things. But may it never be in local congregations where we don't treat each other as we ought to. There's no excuse for it. So that's my soapbox. Let's get into our lesson this evening. I want us to look at scriptures this evening. I don't know if you've noticed this. If you go to any library or any bookstore, those of you that like to buy books, you can see that there's a huge section dealing with marriage. And there's a huge section dealing with raising children. A lot of information out there, a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge. But I'll tell you, when we put all those books together and combined all those ideas, it pales in comparison to what we find in the Scriptures. And it shouldn't be surprising to us as Christians, right? God made us. He designed the family unit. He knows how the family unit should work. And He's designed it in such a way that it brings glory and honor, not only to Himself, but when we function and do the things that we should do in a family unit, it brings honor to our physical family as well. And so I want us to appreciate some things. As I've been mentioning all along this week, these series of lessons have been taken from a book that Wilson Adams put together. I mentioned this at least one time already. I've collected some other thoughts, looked at some commentaries as well. I'm not resting upon Wilson's thoughts or the commentaries, but everything that I've tried to do this week centers upon the Scriptures. And so with that, I will encourage you yet again to have your Bibles open, to get your Bibles in your laps. Nothing wrong with these phones, but I'm fearful nowadays that we're forgetting where to find these books that we talk about in the physical paper of the Bible. So if you have a Bible, a physical Bible, please have that open tonight. Let's study together this important subject that is called the family. So Wilson does a good he has a great idea. I'm going to forward the slides so I can kind of show you the outline to this, and then we'll come back. There are 4 stages that Wilson talks about. We'll mention them very quickly, and I think it's interesting. I think this makes for a great closing of a meeting to helping us appreciate the family unit. When we go through these 2 chapters, it's laid out in such a fashion that all 4 stages of life are right there for us in these 2 chapters. The first stage being the family at the start. And so we're going to talk about marriage in general in the beginning part of this lesson. Then stage 2, as we go a little bit further in the first chapter here, the family begins to expand. We'll talk about children coming along and the challenges that often come with that stage. And then my wealth of experience really ends in this stage here. So the 4th stage that we're going to talk about is solely and completely what other people have told me. So I just want to let you know that. I am gray, but I'm not too old yet. But stage 3, the family and training. That's really where my family's at right now. I really think that we're in that 3rd stage of life. We're going to talk about the challenges that come in the 3rd stage of life because that's a reality for me right now. But then we're going to close out talking about the 4th stage, and that is, this family up here is special to me. This is my mother-in-law and my father-in-law. They're actually kissing in that picture, and you see all the kids' faces. They're pretty disgusted that Grandma and Grandpa still love each other and kiss each other. But there's transition that goes on when the kids leave the home. There are a lot of heartaches, challenges that you as the older generation go through. But as you look back on life, it should be a life filled with joy because you're living with grandkids now. And I've heard that that's just a wonderful stage in and of itself. So that's kind of going to be the kind of a quick synopsis of where we're going to go tonight. And I hope that you'll give me your attention as we study this important subject. So Psalm 127, look at those first 2 verses as I say just a few things about this stage here. I've had the opportunity, I started counting about how many funerals, sounds awful, how do you recover from that? Weddings that I have done. I've done many weddings, and that's what we're talking about. Many weddings, and you know, it's always intriguing to me. I stand at the front of the building, and I watch this beautiful bride come around the corner, and I watch her for a second, but what I'm always drawn, and who I'm drawn to look at, is the man who's going to marry her. Because in that moment, you get a glimpse of really how he feels about this bride. And I'm thankful to say that almost every wedding I've done, as small or big, it does not matter, they have fought back the tears. Because they know how blessed they are. The writer here talks about this special stage, and he compares marriage to the construction of a house and to the guarding of a city. And Wilson says this very true. He says, unless God is followed, it very well could be that the marriage will fail. I've taken some leniency with the text because the text implies to us that big troubles will come. But I also know that there's been many Christians that have married non-Christians, and they've had a tremendous impact on either their wife or their husband, and the wife or husband who was not a Christian in the beginning have obeyed the gospel. And some of those men have become elders in the church, or some of those women have become elders' wives in the church. But there definitely is a general practice here that those individuals that choose to leave God out of the equation, you can almost be certain that the house unit that they are building, the family that they are building, eventually at some point will crumble. I believe that with all my heart. I've seen it time and time again. And that's why it's so crucial in the early years of marriage that God be the main focus of that marriage. One of the blessednesses that I have right now is I also do real estate. So I'm able to talk to a lot of first-time home buyers, a lot of young families, young men and women that have joined themselves together, and they're excited, and they're wanting to buy a house, and they're wanting to have a house just like mom and dad have. And I tell them, how long have mom and dad been married? Well, they're not married. How long did they work to get to that place? Well, many, many years. And you think that it's smart for you to start with what mom and dad have in day one? You've got to build up to that. And so I have the opportunity to talk some young people out of making bad decisions, strapping themselves from the very start in a financial burden that will often break a family unit. You know, it's said that the number one leading cause in most books that I've looked at and statistics, it's been over money. And so that makes sense to me. I see it day in and day out with these young people wanting what mom and dad, and all of a sudden they find out what their payment's going to be, and I'll tell you what, 9 times out of 10, they'll try to talk themselves in that they can afford that payment. They can't. And they set themselves up for failure right from the very start. And so what I try to encourage them to do is to ground their home on biblical truths, moral principles. And if you'll chase after God, then there's a good chance that marriage will stand the test of time. Now, I say there's a good chance because many of us know men and women that have been married many years who are Christians and have left each other. We talked about that at the dinner table today. Got another lead, and he was saying that he's going through a divorce and looking for a place to rent, and all he can afford is $1,100 for rent. We scratch our head and we say, that's in the world. No, it's in local congregations. We're struggling with it. And we as the people of God have to get a grip on it. I want us to note in verse 2, that's kind of an interesting verse here. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrow, for so he gives his beloved sleep. That's kind of an interesting idea that's presented there to us. There's an acronym that Wilson uses in his material and preparation for this, and he centers out, he calls them DINKs, that's what he calls them, double income, no kids. That's what that means, right? So you have a young family, man and wife, both of them are working jobs, both of them have incomes, and if there's young people that are very vulnerable to this idea of living beyond their means, it's that couple. That couple, the one who husband and wife both are working, they have an abundance of money. I have some clients right now, and I mean, they make good money, but they spend a lot of money too, and I'm just wondering what the future holds. And that's the interesting thing about young families. We don't know what the future holds. They tax themselves, they burden themselves, they work all these hours, they start living lavishly, they don't put anything back and away for savings in case a baby comes along or a tragedy in the family comes along. They're living for the moment because they live in abundance. Remember we talked about the text in Deuteronomy chapter 6, and God warned his people when they lived with plenty what might happen? They might forget God. And I'm fearful that that's what's happening with many of our young people. Focused on work, focused on making a good living. And then when kids come along, it seems like it's not really a blessing. We'll talk about how kids are a blessing in the eyes of God, but it's almost like a problem. Now what are we going to do? We got one income. We have to go to one income instead of two. Well, how are we going to make the payments on the house and everything else? Well, maybe we should have thought of that from the very start and budgeted for something like that. And so I love this text here in Psalm 127 and 128 because it teaches us about the dangers of living beyond our means from the very start. So you see, that's 4 stages. I'm already down 1 stage, and we're only in the lesson just a few minutes. So I think we're doing well this evening. Stage 2, verses 3 and 4. Notice what it says there. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. I love how they're referred to here. The fruit of the womb is what? Is it a burden? I want to talk for just a second this idea of abortion and how rampant it is today. You can't help but talk about a subject like this. I won't get sidetracked too long on this. But when you begin to appreciate how God feels about children, don't tell me they're not children. Don't tell me they're a mass clump inside the body who can't live on their own. Well, what if, I heard an argument recently, if that's the direction we're going to take, then what happens after they're born? They can't take care of themselves. Can a baby feed itself? Bathe itself? Change itself? It can't sustain on its own outside the womb as a baby. So what do we say? If they can't sustain life inside the body, and that's why we need to abort them because they're not really a baby, then what do we say about after they're born and they can't sustain life on their own? Are they a baby then or not? I don't get too caught up with those arguments, but what I do get caught up with is how the Lord refers to children. Let me start again. Pay close attention to this. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. It's not a burden. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. I tell you what, that is such a wonderful way to look at this idea of children. I want to expand upon that thought for just a moment this evening. I mentioned this, I believe, last night. We struggled for quite a while having children. That's why I'm so gray, and I'm old, not my wife. But we're older. I'm approaching 50, and, my youngest is 10 years old. You start looking at the numbers, and it tells you kind of how old I was when my last one was born. We started late in life. One of the reasons is we got married late in life. We both wanted to make sure that we made a wise decision. I made a wiser decision than my wife. But we started late in life. And I'll tell you what, at one point we had 5 children, 4 and under. Now you think about that. We were busy. And I say we, because we both were. And it was tiring. It wore us out. But I'll tell you what, as tiring and as hard as it was, each one of those children we viewed as a gift from God. Each one of them have special names. They have family names. Our oldest girls, one is called Faith. Her middle name's Faith because we had to have faith in God. Second one's Grace because God showed grace to us. We didn't deserve the first one, but He blessed us with another one. And you go down the line and you begin to realize they have family names and they have significant names, names that glorify God, but each one of them is a precious gift given by God. They are like arrows in my hands. And I will say 90% of the time I'm very happy. I'm a blessed man, and I know that. I've sat at the feet of women that cry because they can't have children. And I know to some small extent, some would say, no, you don't, you got 5 kids. No, you don't know our story. Before you start speaking about something that you don't know, you might not know everything there is to know about a family situation. I know what it's like a little bit. And my heart breaks for those individuals that long to have children. Long to have a hand full of arrows. Long to be able to thank God for this great and wonderful reward, this beautiful gift that God has bestowed upon them. Sometimes us that have children, we start dealing with dirty diapers and mounts of laundry and sickness and smudges and holes in our garage door, glass windows, speak from experience, a TV that got broke. We forget it, don't we? We don't view our kids so much as blessings then, as much as they are as burdens. We might not say that, but they sure do feel it. Some of the things we say, some of the things we do. Listen, I've said this before. I've had to go into my kid's room at 2:30 in the morning because it's taken me that long to come to the realization I was wrong and wake them up and apologize. I think sometimes as parents we think we got it all figured out. We're going to teach our kids everything that there is to be taught. Want to fill their heads with so much knowledge. And I'll tell you, if you're a good parent along the way, you learn a lot of valuable lessons, don't you? Valuable lessons that will help you be a better Christian, a better soldier for the faith. But I'll tell you, those days of dirty diapers and mounds of laundry can leave us just plumb wore out and exhausted. But if we keep at it, we'll get through those days. We did. You start thinking about, all those kids at such a young age. You go figure out how many diapers we were going through in a week. Got one of those diaper genies that we thought was going to take care of the smell in the house. It didn't. But we got through those days. Heather plowed through the laundry. Seemed like she was doing laundry all day long, every day. You get through that stage. And another stage starts. But it all starts because two people begin to love each other, grow in that love, join themselves in marriage, and they grow. Keep your place here. I want to digress just for a second. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 6. I brought this text up a couple of times this week. It's one of my favorite texts. I often turn to it and just chew on it from time to time. Sometimes I get a little bit more out of it than others. Sometimes I learn something. Sometimes it's just a repeat of what I've already come to understand. But I want us to read this together tonight because I believe that each and every one of us needs to take every opportunity that we possibly can take to get in the minds of our children. I want us to begin in let's begin in verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. That would be my plea with the young people who are not married yet or are getting ready to get married, or have recently been married. Make sure you do everything that you possibly can do for your husband and your wife to make it as easy as possible for them to grow their relationship with God. Verse 5 is an important verse in Israel's beginnings, and it's an important verse in ours as well. It's echoed again. The same idea is given to us as we read already this week in the book of Matthew and in chapter 22. But it goes on in verse 6. And these words I command you today shall be in your heart. Look at verse 7. Teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Think about that text for just a second. Verse 8. You shall bind them as signs on your hands, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. What do you think God was trying to get those families, those ones that had children, to realize? We don't often think about that in this text. At least I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about that. But with all these opportunities and writing it on the doorpost and having it around your hands and frontlets between your eyes, have God as the central focus of your family unit. I'll tell you, some of the greatest biblical conversations have come throwing a ball or mowing the grass with a little one sitting on your lap, or getting in a car like we did tonight to head to a gospel meeting, and from the back seat my little boy says, "Is God and Jesus the same?" And the kids had an argument, are they two people or one people? In a car on a way to a gospel meeting. The idea here that God is trying to get across to His people is seize every opportunity you possibly can. Take every situation and I like to think about it, is make it into a parable. Take this lesson, you're dealing with life over here. Something has happened in life, whether you're laying down, sitting up, whatever it might be, whatever activity you're involved with, and bring their young minds, to God. And I'll tell you what, as a parent, it's a hard task, isn't it? We've got so much on the plate for us. So much that we're involved with, so much that we're committed with, and we're stretched thinly in this life. And to think, now I've got to figure out how to bring that idea that makes me mad. Son, I've told you how many times not to play baseball, not hit the ball against the garage door. You're going to crack one of the windows out. Boom, the window gets cracked out. How do I take that when I'm angry and I just want to, what are you thinking? Take that moment and change it into something that would bring God the glory and the honor. That's the challenge that we have as parents in this stage that we're talking about. But life presses on. I sigh with this stage because this is where I'm at. Some years ago, I bought my girls a little go-kart. We lived out in the country in Whiteland. We had about 8 acres of land. Most of it was just cut grass. So I got them this go-kart so they could get into it and learn how to drive, right? Scared to death of it. Didn't want to touch it. Didn't want to go near it. Not really been in a vehicle like that since. But guess what bomb they dropped on me just recently? Dad, guess what we're taking next year? Driver's ed. You know, I used to listen to the older generation say, blink and it's over. And it truly is. You blink and time passes on. Look at Psalm 128 in the first 3 verses there. Blessed is everyone who fears the Lord, who walks in his ways. And then goes on to say, when you eat the labor of your hands, you shall be happy, and it shall be well with you. Your wife shall be like a fruit vine in the very heart of your house. Your children like olive plants all around the table. You know, I want us to stop and think about that for just a second. This idea of a fruitful vine. I don't know how many of you husbands have referred to your wives as a fruitful vine, but it's adequate here. You start thinking about what happens and what she's done in life, and these children are brought into this world, and then this idea of children being like little olive plants, little shoots that cluster around the family tree. That's the idea that's given to us here. We're all at the table, and this blessing, it's overflowing, and it's fruitful, and it's a wonderful time in life. The kids are growing, you know. I post a lot of pictures. If you're friends with me on Facebook, you will see a lot of pictures of my kids. All through the stages of life. I'm the one in the family that takes pictures. There's not something, kids get so aggravated with me, they're saying, you taking another picture? Yeah, I'm taking another picture. So bad, when my kids were young, 3 years old, I've got videos of Isabel saying, Daddy, Daddy, you posting this on Facebook? Yes, of course I am. My family's in Canada. I've got family that want to see you. We don't get to see you, so I want them to see you. I post a lot of pictures of my family. And I can't help but think of this stage here, some of the cute things they used to say, and I can visually see my kids eating the first baby food and the faces that they made. Cutting up their food is what I did all the time. And I still do it if I don't watch myself. My wife doesn't remind me. My oldest recently brought home a boy, and she said, don't you dare cut up her meat. But that's what I've done all these years. There's adjustments we go through, isn't there? The young families that are here, you'll experience someday as a father. All of a sudden, you look at that little girl. She doesn't want to hold your hand in public anymore. Afraid who might see. And your heart breaks because you're not ready for all of these things to happen. Time doesn't wait for us. Time doesn't wait for us to adjust in these periods. You know, the scriptures reveal to us what life is going to be like. Here's this beautiful table. They're growing. All these little kids that are sitting around their table, they're like these olive blossoms, and they're full of life, and more come, and all of a sudden now, instead of just one little olive plant, you've got 5 that are sitting around the table, all of them with individual lives. And if not careful, you're like me. You get stretched to the max and stressed. I won't tell some of the funny stories in my family life, but I'll tell you what. There were 6 weeks in my life where I was just on edge, angry at everything, because I looked at my girls and I realized they're not little babies anymore. It's hard as a parent when we go through this. But I'll tell you what young people need in this time period here. Yes, we're struggling with our own emotions, our own feelings, the changes of life that are happening. It's not comfortable for us as a mother or a father because we slowly have to let these kids make their own decisions, fall off the edge of the cliff, maybe. But not before you put a parachute on. But they got to learn those lessons, and it's hard on us as parents. We stress, filled with anxiety. But I'll tell you what, in these time periods, please don't forget their blessings. They need parents. I love what Wilson says about this. Young people need parents who are real, who are approachable. I think I have this on here. Yes, right there. They need people that are approachable, parents who are approachable, parents that are wise, available, consistent, firm in their discipline, but also fun. And Wilson goes on to say, if you don't have a sense of humor in this stage, boy, you're in for a long, rocky road. For many of us, we don't laugh like we should. I know in this stage as well, I've seen it time and time again, parents forget their parents and want to become more like buddies or friends with their kids. They're afraid their kids might not like them. And I'll tell you what, that's never been a problem for me in my life. I am the father. I'm doing my very best to be the father for them. There'll come a time when I can be friends with my kids. But it's not now. It's not in this stage, that's for sure. Any parent that makes their child become their little buddy, then we're in big trouble. You are a parent, and God has given you a role, and unfortunately we don't have time to talk about that role, but it is a valuable role. Remember how God feels about these little children. They are a reward, they are a prize, they are a blessing. And they come from God. And He expects much out of you as a parent. Boy, then the dating starts. Driving, high school. I'm not there yet, but college is around the corner. It's a stage with a lot of challenges. But as the Scriptures reveal to us in this psalm here, your wife is like a fruitful vine. The table is ripe. And it is beautiful. Don't forget that in this moment. I want to close this point out reading a little part from Wilson. He says this, raising teens, he's done this, I've not, I'm in the thick of it. I believe what he says here, raising teens is like flying a kite. Let the string out too rapidly, and what happens to the kite? It comes tumbling to the ground. Refuse to let it out enough, and guess what happens? It never flies on its own. You have to run with it. Wise is the parent that releases the string gradually, understanding that at times he needs to pull that string back in. And with God's help, your children will eventually soar, and I want to add to what Wilson says here, soar like eagles. That's what God wants for our little children. It's what we should want for our little children. We need to remember that. Remember they are a blessing as they go through the challenges of life. Okay, I want to speak to the grandparents for just a moment tonight. What about your stage in life? I don't know how many older people I've talked to. I joke with them. I say, the fellow that came up with the golden age obviously was a young person because he didn't know what he was talking about. It's not a golden age. And most of the older generation will laugh with me and say, you're probably right. Until I met this one lady. She said, I don't find that funny. It is the golden age. I reap the blessings of all those nights I spent washing clothes and changing diapers. My grandkids come over to my house. I get to spend time with them. My kids come to my house. And I get to see what happened with my wife, my husband and myself when we fell in love in stage one. And life is beautiful. It's not perfect, but it's beautiful. What a wonderful attitude to have as an older person. What I've tend to see in the older generation sometimes, and I say this with the utmost respect because if you know anything about me, you know that the older generation is my favorite people. But too many times as older people, and I will include myself in there because my kids tell me I'm old, we become grumpy, nitpicky. The young people cannot do a single thing right in our eyes. The world is going to burn. That's the view that we have. And that's not how we should be. I want us to read together just a couple of verses, especially for the older generation. Let's read together and understand how we are to be as we get older. How I need to be when 40 years from now, when grandkids come along. I want to make sure my girls understand that. But in verse 4, grasp this here. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. The Lord bless you out of Zion, and may you see the good of Jerusalem all the days of your life. Yes, here it is. Yes, may you see what? Your children's children. Peace beyond Israel. Wilson says this: what's life like when the dust settles, the kids are grown and gone, and the quietness of an empty house returns yet again? I hadn't thought much about that, but that's kind of how it goes, doesn't it? You start just with yourself, then you get married, you got a husband and a wife. Heather and I used to sit down, hardly say anything to each other. We'd sit down in our cold front room with this gas fireplace in Burkesville, Kentucky, and we'd eat some popcorn and watch TV. House was quiet. You could hear cricket, you could hear an ant crawling across the floor. Longing for kids, longing for the noise. The noise comes, all the challenges of life, the hustle and bustle, raising kids to love God and all that stuff. And then you get to the other side of it, and all the kids leave, and then what are you left with? Quietness again. In some homes, more quiet than others because their spouse then passes away. How are we to view days like that and times like that? Well, the Scriptures reveal to us that this is a time of blessing as well. Did you catch that? Look at verse 4. Behold, thus shall the man be blessed who fears the Lord. Listen, if we fear the Lord, there shouldn't be a time in our life, a stage that we go through, that we don't feel like we're blessed. Yes, we have our crying moments. Listen, God gave us emotions. Why do we cry? Because God gave us that emotion. Right? And when it's tempered with truth, it's okay. But when we're out of control, as we talked about depression, when we allow things to control us and control our life and dictate things about us, get the help. Some of us we have imbalances and we need help. Go to the doctor, get the help that you need. If that's what you need. But sometimes we just need a kick in the pants. That's what my wife did to me. Get out of the bed, Neil. You're the head of this house. You've got to lead this home. Sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need to hear a hard lesson like this in our older years and help us appreciate that we are to be joyful. We have, if we're blessed, grandchildren. If we don't have grandchildren, look around at the other kids in the church. Listen, I've known in local congregations older people that become the candy man. Kids light up, flock to that individual. Doesn't have any grandkids, but he's doing what he can do to stay plugged into the young people. There can be great joy in our older age if we choose to be that way. Turn with me. This will probably be the last cross-reference we look at in Proverbs chapter 17. Proverbs chapter 17. I want us to contemplate a Bible verse over there for just a second. Proverbs chapter 17. Proverbs chapter 17 and in verse 6. Children's children are the what? the crown of an old man. I like that. I hope someday I can kick back on my lazy boy chair and my grandchildren bring me a nice crown and put it on my head and tell me I'm the king. I hope for that. It's not what it's talking about. It's just talking about this glorious part of our life. We should be reaching the pinnacle of our life in our old age, but we don't often view it that way. And I think it's some of what we've done as younger people. We make the older people feel like they're no longer needed, no longer desired. They're a burden on us. And they're not. That's the greatest position in this life. And so those of you that are older in life, realize this. Sit back. Enjoy all your hard work that you've put in. Enjoy watching your family grow up, your grandchildren grow up. And yes, you might encounter some hard spells. Your wife might die. Your husband might die. But even in that, weep, sorrow, but don't sorrow like others. Realize that you are still a blessed individual. There is more to this life than this life. We forget that, don't we? I'm going to close with this little poem, then the lesson's yours. I know I'm over tonight. Bob Benson writes a touching piece entitled, Laughter in the Walls. It's about a simple house that housed their growing family. One by one, the rooms emptied out, and their children grew up and left the home. He writes this, but the house, wouldn't be empty. Every corner, every room, every nick in the coffee table will be crowned with memories. And Peg and I will sit quietly by the fire and listen to all the laughter in the walls. I love that. And I hope that serves as an encouragement to you to understand that if you're in the fourth stage of life, you're in the greatest part of life that there possibly can be. You don't have to change diapers anymore if you don't want to. You don't have to run the streets to find out where little Jimmy or Peg is at. Your kids do that. You're living in the greatest time in this life. Not just because of that, but because, Lord willing, you are closer to home than the rest of us. I hope that you've seen that in this series of lessons. These lessons have all been about heaven. I want to go home. And I want to help as many people along the way get there with me. But there is a right way to live, and there is a wrong way to live. And I hope tonight, single looking for a spouse, young married couple, ones that have young children, ones that are in the thick of battle in that middle stage of life, those of us that are on the other side, I pray to God that all of us have put God first and are doing our very best to get to heaven. I'm going to say it again. Because if we've missed heaven, we've just missed all there is. I hope these series of lessons have been a benefit to you. I've challenged you tonight. I am well over time, and I know that. I have 5 little kids that are going to tell me that. Dad, you are way over tonight. My wife might even tell me that tonight. But it's been a big joy for me to come and be with you here at Eastside. Mr. Coles, I pray for you here. Pray for your work. Keep doing what you're doing. There's a good group of people here. Love him. Love his family. Love the elders here, their elders' wives. Listen, they're not perfect. Are you perfect, brother? You're not perfect, right? But he's doing the best that he can. Brother, are you perfect? No, but you're doing the best you can, right? And that's the wonderful thing about this relationship with God. That's all he wants and expects out of us. To do the best we can. That's it. Do the best that you can do to be pleasing to God. And at the end of the day, guess what happens? You still fall short. But we serve an awesome God who's full of love, mercy, and grace. And where we fall short, guess what he does? He fills that gap. You have the opportunity tonight to make your life right with God. You have the opportunity tonight, if you're living in the world and part of the world, to get out of that relationship and become part of the family of God. I did that many years ago. I've said this before, with a mohawk and 4 earrings. And it was the greatest decision of my life. And I'll tell you what, I was pretty messed up back then. If I could get my life turned around, I know you can as well. And the wonderful thing is you've got a bunch of people here that want to help you. And I know you come forward and make your life right with God. We baptize you tonight. There's going to be a lot of people crying here in this group because they know what's happened. If you're here and you're a Christian, you've not been living right, dear brother in Christ, dear sister in Christ, give it up. Whatever you're holding on to, give it up. Live for Jesus again with all your heart. And it's not easy, but it's so worth it. So keep doing what you're doing. Don't give up. We can help you in any way tonight to obey the gospel or have us pray with you tonight. These seats are open. You raise your hand, I will come to you. But please let your request be made known tonight as we stand and as we sing.